Good evening. Thank you for joining us for what is now the last YANA Evening Tea of the year. 2020 has certainly been pretty crazy. Tonight's topic is something we probably all could use a little dose of: purpose, passion, and profit, finding meaningful work in a stressful world. This is just a really good, needed topic, and I hope we have some chance to do some Q&A and chat at the end. And everybody just sit back and relax, pull up a cup of tea or your beverage of choice, and enjoy this conversation. Before I hand the mic over to Ken Inadomi, YANA's president, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for your support of YANA, for attending the gala last week. We missed a live launch. It is available, the recording, on our website, as well as on our YouTube channel. So you can watch it anytime, share the love. And it's never too late to support YANA, particularly between now and the end of the year. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful holiday season. I'll see you at the end of this program. And now here's Ken Inadomi.
Okay, great. Rachel, thank you so much. And I agree that the timing for this topic could not be more perfect. And the two speakers that we have tonight could not be more perfect: Nell Derick Debevoise and Dasia Moore. Nell is a longtime friend of YANA. She's been a moderator, a spotlight speaker, a webinar speaker. She is the CEO and co-founder of Inspiring Capital, a B Corp, which really is the preeminent organization in that space of purpose, profit, passion, and community. And it's really something that we need so much of today. I know that Nell bleeds Harvard Crimson, but I know there's also a lot of Yale Blue in her life, in her family. And I have a feeling that she has a very informed opinion about Sally's versus Pepe's, and we can't wait to hear from Nell tonight. Dasia Moore, what can I say? Deja is nothing less than a rising star in Yale's social impact constellation. She is the youngest ever YANA board member. I refer to Deja as the moral compass of the YANA board. She's wise beyond her years. She is the co-founder of Go South, which is a nonprofit that's having a lot of impact in the American South. I tell people that if there were a list of 30 under 30 of social impact thought leaders, I wouldn't be surprised if Desia's name were on that list. She is a beat reporter covering the Metro desk of the Boston Globe, and it's just my pleasure to introduce her and Nell. So ladies, please take it away.
Thank you, Ken, for those introductions. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so glad to be here tonight with everyone virtually, and so impressed with how Ken and Rachel have been able to continue this series despite everything going on and with COVID. So thank you both for that.
I appreciate the cross-Ivy warmth here. I do not indeed have formal affiliation with Yale, but I've been blown away. I was at the first YANA conference in Midtown Times Square. I don't know, was that 6 years ago maybe? And it's just awesome. Obviously service runs deep in the Yale blood, which is perhaps top of my list of things I envy from my Boston alma mater. But it's awesome that you all are doing this, and the really open tent is very cool. So Deja, on home turf, I think you get to open our conversation, and I'll continue from where you leave off.
Yeah, I was really excited as soon as Ken proposed this conversation. I watched your last webinar with YANA and thought that there's no better time than right now to talk about, particularly for people in early to mid-career, to talk about building a career that is centered around purpose and impact. I have sought purpose in my work in a number of ways while I was still a student and since graduating. And in many ways, I feel like I'm still finding the right way to express or find purpose in my work. Throughout college, I was really focused on work in the nonprofit space and anti-poverty policy research specifically. That took me to MDC in Durham, North Carolina, which is a wonderful organization that for decades has been doing some of the best research on poverty and inequality in the South, and also leading philanthropies in the South to do more impactful grant making and more equity focused grant making. So that was a wonderful experience. But I always struggle to square my passion for nonprofit work with my love of writing. I love telling stories, and writing every day for work was definitely something that I dreamed of, and something that in some ways I'm living now. But it took a lot of trial and error, and there's still a lot of trial and error going on to figure out exactly how to combine those two things. But I think for me, and I would love to hear for you now, where kind of a purpose-driven career focus came from. For me, I grew up moving a lot in the South as a kid, partly in Charleston, South Carolina, Reidsville, which is a really small tobacco town in northern North Carolina, and saw within my own family, but also in the communities that we lived in, the effects of centuries of racial inequality and white supremacy, but also just the lived experience of being in a low-income family, and trying to navigate that growing up, but then also trying to figure out, like, so many people in my communities supported me when I went away for high school to a boarding school, and then when I went to Yale. And so figuring out how to use what I do and what I love to pour back into those communities that raised and poured into me. So that's really where the drive comes from for me. And like I said, I'm still figuring out exactly where to place all of that energy.
That's awesome. And what about because I think of purpose as sort of what you love, what you're good at, and what you need with what the world needs, right? So the writing thing obviously is clear and strong for you. So journalism makes an awesome sense and is a really high impact profession, especially these days. How did that kind of aha come of the writing piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just thinking about it throughout my fellowship year after college, and thinking about transitioning to journalism. And then I got a wonderful opportunity with a new company to kind of start like trying out journalism. I was writing a daily newsletter. And so that kind of gave me my first taste. But even within that, there's a lot of space within media, some that's more focused on, kind of building businesses and brands, and then others that are more in terms of service. So it was really this most recent role with the Boston Globe that I started in April that has really allowed me to find that sense of purpose and serving a community. I think because it's locally rooted, the community that you're serving is more tangible and more clear. And you can hold people and power to account in a different way than at something that is more topical or digital or national. And so when that job opportunity here came along, that's when it really kind of clicked for me that it's like, okay, this is something that I can do what I enjoy writing, but also do it in a way that has a more direct and measurable impact. And it's definitely been tough starting in the pandemic and with, an uprising for racial justice going on this year as well. But it's also been really grounding. And I think that's a great thing that maybe people don't always recognize about purpose-driven work, is that it can be very centering if you're the type of person who's going to kind of internalize things that are going on in the world anyway. Then for me, it's really helpful to have that outlet and constructive focus in, what is my role in this? What can I do in this? And how do I process this information in a different way than I might if I'm only consuming it instead of reporting it?
Yeah. No, I love that. I think, and I'm happy to share some of my story too, but just to start with the timing of this right now, I think, you know, as Ken and Rachel opened with, and as Deja shared, I think I hear a mix, right? On one hand, there's kind of folks like, I'm worried about a disease. I'm worried about economic losses, losing my job or losing my company. Like, I'm worried about my elders, right? How can I can't layer purpose onto everything that I'm worried about right now, you know, and I get that. I would presume that a lot of our audience is not so skeptical or reluctant because you're here. But if there is anybody out there, and definitely invite you to chat in questions or comments, we'll kind of keep an eye and follow that, or get to it in Q&A. But please do pipe up with your skepticisms or your challenges. From my seat, having been thinking about purpose and purpose-driven work for the last decade, most specifically, it was already coming before. I think a few factors. I think that the influence of technology means that our life and work are fully mixed, right? I think a lot of people talk now about work-life integration. You can't possibly balance on two separate sides of the scale. It's all together, right? Your email inbox and your boss or your clients are in your hand at all given times. And what I saw happening even before COVID was that makes it more personal, right? So whereas before, if work was a paycheck and the gold watch that they were going to give me when I retired at 65, you know, hopefully I wasn't seeing them do a whole lot of evil, but I wasn't quite so worried because I wasn't so engaged in it, right? And now you have this sense, again, even pre-COVID, where my work is with me on vacation sometimes, and in the evenings and in the weekends as I'm feeding my baby or, you know, making dinner for my family. And I think all of a sudden then the ethics of our work became a lot more visceral and connected, right? Because it's our identity and it's in our lives. And obviously COVID has just ramp that up, right? We're literally, I think, I don't know if we're living in our offices or working in our homes or some of both, but you know, when there's dogs and babies and family and repairmen coming and going from people's work lives, it just becomes really personal. And now it's hard to kind of overlook elements of work that aren't aligned with our own values and ethics. So
Absolutely.
right. I think that's one reason that it's so important. And then I think your next point about that, you know, kind of North Star, that organizing principle, I know, you know, the people that we work with, certainly on my team and alums of Inspiring Capital or our fellows, the ability to have that grounding force of I am doing this for this is monstrously helpful. Right? Because we can't fix it all. I don't know how to contain a pandemic. I don't know how to make a vaccine. I don't know how to save all the small businesses, right? But I know what I'm doing to help people connect to their true heart and head and soul and sense of purpose so that they can go off and do the work that they do. And having that organizing principle has helped a lot over these 6 months. Not that there aren't days that I have struggled to get out of bed or know what to do, but I think it absolutely helps. And we see it on the company level. We talk about purpose for performance in terms of the me outcomes, right? That productivity and focus, the we, so a company team level, and then the world of, you know, positive outcomes that come from people being purposeful. Anyhow, so I think that timing piece is super important. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I am hopeful that this really is kind of a portal, a turning point, that there is no back to normal, right? Which meant inadequate healthcare, institutionalized racism, overwork and burnout, stress, to say nothing of economic insecurity. And I'm hopeful. TBA, I think still, but I maintain hope. Where are you on the hope meter?
I'm pretty hopeful too. I think that there's a level of awareness and attention that people are having to pay to their own lives, and kind of like what you were saying in terms of that life now including more of work in a lot of ways. But people are paying more attention to their own lives, and I believe to the lives of their communities and the country and the world as well. And I don't really foresee that going back to the way it was before. I mean, once people reach a certain level of awareness, I think it's really hard to dial that back. I do have concerns sometimes about it's easy to want to do something or want to take action when all of the problems are right in front of you. We can't turn away right now. Many of us who are fortunate enough to be able to work from home right now, have the news at our fingertips literally all day. And, we're very actively living under and in a pandemic. So I do worry a little bit about once we do have some of the distractions that we're used to back in our routines, will some of that attention slip? But I think a large portion of it is here to stay.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair concern, right? And I think some parts are easier to hold on to. Like, I think some of the work-life balance and people who are dead set against work from home now realizing like it's very doable and in some ways more productive and certainly in some ways more pleasant, at least for some of us, to your point, who have that privilege. I think some of the reading material for our fellowship this week was talking to the point that that certain people very much have to give up some power for us to rectify some of the issues in society, right? And specifically speaking to racial inequality, but lots of other versions, socioeconomic inequality, gender, there's a lot of issues there. And I'm very much an expand the pie person, right? I absolutely do not believe that there's a fixed pie that we're slicing into pieces and I need some of yours to come up to level. And there is a need to relinquish some control and or some power in order to get to equitable. And I think that is a little harder, right? It's one thing to hold on to this great new thing we've discovered of more family time and less of a commute. But I'm curious how we will incite, inspire, induce folks to think about releasing, even if it's just some of that control. I think we can all stand fully in our power. So I don't know if you have a silver bullet to making that happen. That would be really great.
I wish. There's a really good comment that I see that just popped up in the chat from Mark Romazer, who says that people with disabilities have been asking for remote work as an accommodation for years. And that they've always been told it was impossible. So what will people say going forward now that COVID has proven otherwise? And I think that's getting to the point of exactly what you said, Nell, which is that, there are parts of our previous normal that we should not return to. And I'm hopeful that we won't, especially on the remote work front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. People are talking a lot, obviously, about the gender dynamic there as well. Women being obviously not exclusively, but predominantly caregivers. And, similarly, right, moms, we have a program for women reentering after having kids and having exited the workforce. And they have really struggled with this too. Like, trust me, I can do it from home, and obviously a very powerful argument too from folks with disabilities who can contribute massive amounts, but may not be able to physically get around as well. And so for sure, Mark, I hear and see leaders being like, oh, yeah, that kind of does work actually, right? And I don't think there is a line to change that. I think your point, Deja, it's kind of Pandora's box. Once it's open, like there's no putting that back in. I think if leaders want to make an excuse, right, and I don't think people wake up wanting to be more biased or prejudiced against folks with disabilities or women or Black people or Indigenous, whatever, but we have been socialized in a certain way that makes us biased, right? And so I think if people want to make excuses to hold on to that control, they will be able to find something else. So it's nice that this one has been kind of disproven. I don't think it's perfect. So yeah, no, exactly. I don't think it's that, well, that they don't wake up wanting to be less. I don't know. I think I think they don't necessarily wake up wanting to give up control, right? And I think that's the challenge. I hold on to a pretty positive view of most of humanity that all things being equal, even just evolutionarily, we are equipped to contribute to the greater good, right? As humans, we collaborate more than most species. And so there is an inherent drive. I absolutely agree that it is perverted and hidden and blocked by all kinds of societal and media factors. But Deja, I know we talked about the getting to, some kind of tips and tools, and you spoke to your journey a little bit, but do you want to turn to that a little bit, knowing that there are folks of all kind of positions in the audience probably wanting some help there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm excited to hear what you have to say on this front as someone who's still learning. But yeah, I think that one of the tools that has been important to me in kind of crafting a purpose-driven career has been finding people who support that purpose. So really relying on community. I think especially, a lot of people joining us tonight graduated from Yale. And, YANA has been an incredible resource for me, not just in terms of learning practical skills and making connections, but also because I think it's easy, depending on what sort of communities you're in and what schools you attend, to feel that a purpose-driven career, especially one that might require you to make sacrifices in terms of salary, or the city where you're living, or all sorts of things that kind of signal success to others. It can be difficult to go against that grain, even if you're certain of what you want. And so I think for me, it's been really important to surround myself with a community that, is dedicated to finding that intersection of what they love and what they have to offer the world or their community, however defined. So that's been a really important tool for me. And I guess some practical ways that I've done that has been through YANA. But also, just seeking out people in terms of friends and things like that. And also mentors. For me, it's been really important to find people who have, pivoted within their careers and had lots of different goals and figured out how to balance those things, because that's the type of personality I have and the type of career that I want. So yeah, I think community building has been my number one tool thus far.
And then what happens in those communities? I mean, with YANA, it's obviously kind of a formal but extracurricular organization. What else? Is it largely that kind of conversation, or are there other elements to those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think in less formal settings with friendships, I mean, I was really lucky that two of my closest friends from Yale, I co-founded Go South with. And so we talk as co-founders and also as friends. And we all have day jobs. So we find a lot of, direction and support from one another. And I think it looks like saying, like, I don't know if this will make sense to people, but I really want to pursue this thing, and having that source of validation and also checking you sometimes, but being able to know that that's coming from a place of like similar mindset and similar goals. In North Carolina, for me, that looks a lot like showing up at other nonprofits events. And there are all sorts of great things in Durham, and in many mid-sized cities are kind of my favorite, because you have so many of those opportunities to go to. Like in Durham, there was this thing called Black August in the Park that was Black vendors, but it was also a range of nonprofits, everything from an association of doulas to like criminal justice reform groups, and just meeting people in those spaces, even if your relationship doesn't become work after that. It's again just that place to go for, I'm exhausted by this work. Are you also exhausted? And then you can kind of commiserate together, but also support one another in continuing and keeping up the fight.
Yeah, no, I think I love that you brought up the community piece, because I think that's so important. And I think, fundamentally, I mean, those are all good kind of tactics. And I think what they fundamentally get at is like shaping your reality, right? Surrounding yourself. I mean, this idea of purpose driving performance, and that we would all be better and that our stock returns would actually be higher if we aligned our hearts and our skills and our souls with what we do in the world, right? That's even in Larry Fink's latest investment letters, where he talks about ESG data. He's not quite there, right? But I think that, so you have to kind of create a little bit of a bubble, right, around yourself of like, I too think that you can and should align these things, because you'll do best in the long run, right? And problematically, yes, we are still misallocating economic resources. And so it often means less pay or, different financial incentives. But I hear you, I see you, and I get why that makes sense and will eventually pay off in one way or another. So I think that's a really good point. I love the avoiding burnout question. And so maybe I'll get to that in just a minute. I just want to share one of our kind of basic frameworks. I think, to Deja's point, this is obviously a lifelong adventure. And so from, your point on that at your, extraordinary self under 30, and then I imagine that callers are a whole range. I see some colleagues and friends who are definitely in the over 30 category, and maybe even over 50. I won't go further and embarrass anyone, but it's a lifelong journey, right? We talk about in Inspiring Capital, we talk about purpose done right. And one of the 5 features is that it's ongoing. It is never over. Like, you can get a coffee mug printed with your purpose statement and it's still not over. It evolves, it iterates. And one of the second most important things to me is that it's really holistic. It's through your life and work. And so we talk about spheres of impact, which is the topic actually of one of the other YANA chats that I did that Ken mentioned. So look that up if you want to really deep dive. But for folks wrestling with this, we map kind of your private spheres of impact, right? And so your self-care, like, what are you doing to stay sane and, ideally generous and empathetic and kind on a day-to-day basis, like sleeping enough, eating well, maybe some mindfulness some days, or exercise, playing with your cat or dog, right? To me, that's an absolute purpose driver, because if you're not taking care of yourself, especially, given the high burnout rates in social impact, social justice work, you can't ultimately be of service to anyone. And then the other internal driver is friends and family, right? How are you supporting the people you care about? Are you, raising feminist sons? Are you, supporting dignified aging for your elders? I think that's all also really high impact stuff that we often undervalue for ourselves, but also for other people in society. And then, of course, there's the external stuff, right? Many of us spend more hours at our job than anywhere else. And so that is an important place to line up, like, writing in that local grounded way has become for you, Deja, alongside Go South in a different way. But beyond work, I also point people to community, right? The board memberships, the informal ways that you engage, and finally your money, right? And even if you're a nonprofit worker or early in your career and you feel like you don't have much money, you buy stuff. I promise you buy stuff, right? And so who do you buy it from? When do you buy it? How often? How do you get it to yourself? And buying local, buying from Black and female or Indigenous or, disabled people and entrepreneurs in your local community, so it's not traveling a ton of miles and burning a ton of carbon. That's all really cool. And I think it's easy to underestimate that as well. So especially for folks who are kind of struggling in more traditional economy roles, I think looking to some of those other spheres is really helpful. And the final piece to that is that the spectrum of impact, meaning that nonprofit is great and super powerful. And obviously in the YANA community, there are some badass nonprofit leads and donors and board members, which is huge. Not-for-profit is only 7% of our GDP, give or take, in the US. And when I look at the scale of change I want to see, it's a lot more than 7%, right? So we need government on board, we need public policy, but we also need the private sector to be on board and doing better things, which I think is so exciting, because that means that every single human, regardless of where you work or engage or buy or volunteer, can have a part of social environmental impact. So I think those are some of the just kind of frameworks that we use to help people identify, I think, impact that's often under our nose, and either we're just not giving ourselves credit, or we're leaving opportunity and impact on the table, right? So those are some frameworks that
yeah, I was actually on a call last night with a group of people in social justice and economic justice work in North Carolina. And one of the things we kept returning to was how different everyone's pathway was, and how different their focus was, and their stories. And some were working at established nonprofits, others had started their own kind of grassroots campaigns. It was such a range, and that's an idea that I've been returning to a lot, that it's just like everyone can contribute in different ways, and for some people it might be their full-time job, and for others it might not be. And then there are ways to bring justice into what you do, even if it's not necessarily part of your role. I think something I would add to the spheres that you named, and especially with people who are in more traditional economy roles, is that, one of the biggest sources of inequality we have is income inequality and hiring practices. And so that's a space where anyone can help make change within their own organization, because every organization, even those committed to justice and equity, could improve in terms of who they're hiring, what they're paying people when they hire them, whether people actually feel welcome once they're there and trained and supported and mentored. So I think that's something that I've seen people talk a lot more about this year, and I hope that continues.
Absolutely agree, right? It's like an opportunity for literally any human who works,
yeah.
Right? And if your organization is perfect, congratulations. It's probably not.
Right.
But if it is, congrats, go teach other people, right? Go inspire other folks. But I think that's spot on, of really asking the questions of like, why do we need it to be a college degree? Why do we need it to be an Ivy League college degree as a first screen for certain roles, right? And it is, you can and should absolutely take the best talent. And in a world that is evolving and changing and diverse, the best talent is not what a lot of textbook best talents would look like. It's just, there's so much data, there's so many anecdotes, right? The business case for diversity has been made about 1 trillion and 3 times over. So, if anyone is looking for that, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share resources, and Deja, I'm sure you have some too, but it really is just a business imperative at this point to serve what is our world today.
Mm-hmm.
I know there was a point Pam brought up of ageism. Absolutely, another very valid and problematic bias. And in my case, I started on the purpose journey and have actually evolved to for-profit with purpose. But 1,000%, I mean, we work with a lot of millennials early in career who are super purpose hungry and committed. We work with a lot of encore career folks, right, who at 55 or 60 or younger have been squeezed out or chosen to leave, right, for-profit or traditional careers, again, adding monstrous value and doing incredible things in the impact sphere, or staying right where they are and leading with incredible purpose in the for-profit space. So this is not a millennial thing. Again, purpose done right in our language is absolutely universal and human and accessible. And I think as most things in life, with age comes a lot of wisdom and more depth about what one's own purpose is and how it matters in life. So yeah, this is not a young person's game by any stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. What you said about, our definition of purpose being universal and accessible, um, I would love to talk more about that, because I think that so often, for sometimes cultural reasons or perception, and sometimes really practical reasons, then finding your purpose can, come with a tone of sort of either elitism or just inaccessibility. There's a lot of pressure um, for students, people just coming out of school from low-income backgrounds, to do the thing that will help propel them into financial stability as quickly as possible, or help them support their families. And then similarly, for people who are older and have their own families, then I'm sure there's a lot of hesitancy about, again, potentially sacrificing some level of income to pursue something new and different. And so I have a few thoughts on how the concept of purpose can be as accessible as possible. But I would love to hear how you address that in your work.
Yeah, so the first thing that I would say as a little bit of a disclaimer is that I really do think our labor system is pretty broken, right? And so there are just systemic issues around living wages, thriving wages, and how we kind of treat it. It's been so interesting, right, to see the lionization all of a sudden belatedly of frontline workers, right, that have been really undervalued and underappreciated and underpaid for decades. So there are certainly some systemic problems there. I think the point is that work has, again, always for all time been a real dignity provider, right? And so I see purpose as just an extension of that. And some of the famous research is actually out of a Yale professor, Amy Wisniewski, who coined or helped to coin the phrase and concept of job crafting. And a lot of her research, as many other academics, has focused on blue-collar frontline workers like janitors in hospitals or traffic cops. And so some of these anecdotes I think are super powerful, because when they interviewed this very highly engaged traffic cop who was extremely satisfied with her job in what is a really challenging situation, right? None of us much like being in traffic. Imagine that being your job for an entire shift, to sit in the middle of traffic, kind of combatively breathing car fumes. And she said, look, I get 12 to 14,000 people home safely every day that I go to work. What more powerful way is there to spend time than that, right? And so it was just this level of contextualizing what she does, or the hospital janitors who said, I help reduce disease, and reduce hospital stays and hospital mortality by keeping this place clean, right? And so I think it's that level of kind of context, right? We need bagel makers and investment bankers and authors and publicists and, microchip producers as much as we need COVID researchers and college tutors, right? There are 7.8 billion of us, and we don't all need to do one specific thing. We all need to make the puzzle work in an integritous, responsible, empathetic way. And so that's, I think, when we fix the system so that opportunity and training is distributed equally, and then financial rewards and other compensation is distributed in not just a financial way, but a more long-term view, then I think the problem is solved. And now purpose is truly universal. I think right now there's bits and starts. It depends so much on individual company leadership, which turns out isn't perfect yet.
Yeah, yeah. I think all of what you said was great. And I think that going back to the idea of finding purpose in any work, I think is a great way to think about it, that makes it more accessible. And I often wonder sometimes if some of the kind of elite undertones of saying like a purpose-driven career actually come from people who have access to elite spaces, because so often we might conceptualize it more narrowly in terms of what is purpose, what is purpose-driven work. But then people who are living their purpose in a number of ways might not even feel that tension in the way that sometimes it's conceptualized in certain circles.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, right? It's definitely, there's a narrative problem, right? That's why we talked about the community being so important, to have other people who share this reality. And again,
Right.
it doesn't cost anything. I mean, I am luckily buffeted by, and but I very much realize the fact that most Americans don't have $400 and also may not have healthcare if they don't have a job, and that is very dire, and getting by is a real concern, right? But I think if we did a good job of teaching folks what purpose means and how to connect to it, it's not mutually exclusive. It doesn't cost very much in terms of time. It takes some time and effort, but it really does pay back in spades, and I think probably one of the best examples I see to counter this is faith. I think a lot of people who have whatever version of faith in their lives, whether that's organized or not, or whatever religion it may be, gives a bit of that kind of broader perspective that helps motivate and kind of have an eye on that. What else? I mean, again, I think your point about having access to these conversations around purpose-driven life, and it all can feel very airy-fairy and like green juice drinking and millennial. What other, have you seen other solutions or other fora or tools that are making it more accessible?
I think that some nonprofits have gotten a lot better about engaging their communities and seeing themselves as part of the community rather than a separate entity that then serves or helps the community. And I think that is so important because you can't create solutions for other people because people know their own lives best. And so, but then I think, but the nonprofits have the capital, the financial capital, the social capital, the reputational capital. For anyone who's familiar with MDC, I'm like pulling straight from, from the MDC book. But there are all those forms of capital that nonprofits are able to leverage, but whenever nonprofits or other kind of social justice driven organizations are able to put that capital directly into other people's hands, I think something powerful always happens. And it's a great way to engage people and include them in those processes. I also think, Rachel brought up in the chat something about kind of self-care and avoiding burnout and purpose-driven work. And I think that's actually an equity and accessibility question as well, because we've talked about kind of socioeconomic inequality and how that might impact people's decisions about their careers. But I think there's also, when you're talking about social justice work, especially, then it attracts a lot of people who have personal experience with the injustice. And everyone at any organization will be impacted differently by interacting daily with whatever forms of bias or structural inequality you're addressing or thinking about. And so I think that learning proper self-care and supporting our colleagues and friends and community members in caring for themselves is actually a really important way of making purpose-driven work more accessible. So I don't know, for me, that takes the form of like small things like candles. So I appreciate it when you mention, how our spending can also be part of our purpose. Because especially with COVID and not being able to see some of the people who are most important to me, then it's been important for me to like shop for them and like mail people things when I can. You get the nice little dopamine hit of like hitting purchase. But then if it's also something that is, that I feel like will help my friend like take better care of themselves. And maybe it's also from a creator or a company that's aligned with like some of their values or their identities, or mine, then it's a small way to kind of take care of the community that takes care of me. But I think that, people who are in a position of power within their organization to really, not just say like, take care of yourself, but also create concrete resources that allow people and help people to take care of themselves is really important to expanding the universe of people who can like healthily do that work.
Totally. And your point, that difference between equity and equality is so important here, right? Of realizing that we just all have our own stuff. And so, there are myriad identities. And there is something about being a Black woman or about being not physically able or, all of these kind of very specific things that we know that make the day a bit harder, right? That make the news cycle in 2020 with, a president who won't denounce white supremacy, with, the long overdue maybe awakening or, at least kind of shift in support and mainstreaming of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so realizing as an employer, as a colleague, as a customer, that yes, we all have our own stuff. And there are certain folks who are just starting with a tank minus full, right? And so to get back to a full tank, or at least 2/3, that is enough to get through the day at your best, at our best selves, takes more, right? And so it's not necessarily about equality of policies and access and resources, but really being smart about equity.
Absolutely.
And I think the burnout question is so important, Rachel. I don't want to skirt it. I think having the sense of why you do what you do is really, really important. And then having a really firm oxygen mask rule that you are taking care of yourself first before you're trying to do that purpose. Because again, it's not an either or, it is just a foundational prerequisite to have yourself in shape. And we all go through hard times there. If you're a voting rights person in the Georgia area, you're probably going to be really full out for the next 6 or 8 weeks. And that's great, but certainly in the medium term and hopefully in the short term, you need some little replenishment, or else you're going to start making mistakes, or you're not going to see opportunities, or you're not going to be empathetic and convincing about your purpose, right? So I think really getting smart about what works for you, right? What do you really need? Is it candles? Is it baths? Is it puppies? Is it kale for dinner and good vegetables? Like, what do you need? And then getting that is, I think, just a life skill that is critical for being super high impact and purpose driven. I don't know how you can do it without. And I think 2 breaks, lightening up and laughing, watching something goofy on Netflix, hanging out with that community and telling jokes or stories about childhood, whatever those things are. It's important to get some levity now and then in the midst of hard work, because it's a marathon, right? Most of these things are not sprints. Even if you're a voting rights person in Georgia, there's a lot else to do after the runoff. So keep yourself in good shape.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I like Liana's question. I don't know if you have immediate thoughts, but this idea that, that we have gotten kind of in a typical American way, very focused on your job is your passion and your purpose. But in some cases there isn't that privilege, or maybe it just doesn't line up. How would you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that even if you have, the privilege to consider your work that way, there's still some problems with that framing, because I think that, I've encountered it in nonprofits and startups, in more traditional newsrooms, everywhere, where purpose forms the core of what the people in the organization are doing. And there's always the danger that the culture will veer into, because this is your purpose and your passion and your work, you should always be on. You shouldn't take breaks. And you should be committed to this above all else. I am a firm believer that at the end of the day, even the most purpose-driven jobs are jobs. And probably most of us, even if we love to stay busy, I do, would not necessarily put them first all the time if we didn't live in, a capitalist society that doesn't give us other options. So I think that it's okay to acknowledge that. And if that like merging of passion and work becomes too much, to step back from that and seek purpose in some of the other spheres that you named earlier now. And in terms of just like feeling like your work has to be your passion, I think especially depending on where you are in your career, not just based on age, but based on whether you're considering doing other things or changing things up or pursuing new goals, then, one way that I kind of keep focus when I've been in, individual jobs that aren't necessarily my passion, that I'm not necessarily, like excited thinking about when I wake up, has been thinking about, well, how do I use this in service of pursuing my passion down the road? Like, how do I learn from this so that when I do pursue this thing that I really, really want, I'm better equipped to do it? And so then I think like turning that question inward, that focus inward, and like, how do I help myself right now can be really helpful, especially if you're inclined to turn your focus outward most of the time.
I think that's brilliant. I think that's what's super important to me. So I think the biggest gift that I can give folks on this journey is this idea of meaning making, right? And so there's a lot of word soup here and, pros and cons about the kind of purpose zeitgeist that we live in. But we talk about this cycle from impact, right? Which are the very tangible, concrete things that happen because you do something, right? To meaning, which is the connective tissue, up to purpose, which is a more kind of lofty, lifelong goal. The best example I found is thinking about working out or exercise, right? And there are lots of impacts of working out. It might be a six-pack for the summer. It might be better heart health. It might be the friends that you make when you work out at the gym. It might be the endorphins that are released by the exercise that allow you to be a more pleasant spouse or colleague, right? So we could all go on and on and on about the benefits of exercise. And yet, if we could show hands, we would. Who exercises as much as they think they should, right? I certainly don't. Statistically, Americans don't. That is well proven. So why not, right? If we have these lofty purposes that we want to live to. And so the story that illustrates this is a friend whose daughter had a baby. He was 60. He was getting quite a little paunchy, a little overweight, to the point that not only his wife, but also his doctor were kind of like, you got to do something. You got to, get to the gym or walk around the block or walk around several blocks, or, you have to exercise. And he just could never make time, right? There's always something else. There's TV, there was work, he was commuting. He had this grandbaby. Boom, 6 days a week. The guy's on the elliptical, the guy's walking, right? He's going up the stairs because he had this higher purpose. I want to be a present grandfather for this new baby, right? And he was able to connect the dots in that way. Whereas before, 80 gajillion reasons, though there may be to work out, some of which, his wife wanted him around, like those are pretty good reasons, but it wasn't quite linked to this purpose. He wasn't making the link. And so I think that is what's really important. I think it's hard, maybe impossible, certainly hard to be superb, to reach your full potential in your work if you find no meaning in it. I don't think it goes well. It's not sustainable over time. So that meaning can be exactly your example, Deja, of I'm learning how to bank a deal. I'm learning how to do the finances of a merger so that I can go to the nonprofit sector, which has all these duplicative organizations that would be so much stronger together, and understand how to do the finances there with the guidance from the nonprofits about all the other elements. Right? Or I'm, working right now to get some credibility on my resume to have student loan repayment and to have some income that allows me to put myself through a graduate degree or tuition reimbursement. And so yes, I'm an accountant and I'm not able to do some of the things I would like to do with my accounting right now, like tracking salary gaps and disparities, for example, which accountants are very well prepared to do. But maybe as an entry level or at a certain organization that isn't values aligned, you can't use that, but you're getting all these skills, right? Or the credibility or the income or whatever it might be. And so, Liana, I don't see any problem with looking to volunteer activities or family activities or self-care or the way you use your money as a driver of purpose. But I do believe that you need to make meaning out of your job toward that purpose and toward those things, if that makes sense. Because I don't think all of the things that Jeffrey Pfeffer talks about, that work is killing us, that anxiety and stress and related lifestyle diseases come from not finding meaning at work. It's just, you have to have a sense of why you're getting up in the morning. It does not have to be about the work itself, right? So the job crafting theory that I spoke to earlier talks about the tasks you do, the people you work with, both colleagues, suppliers, customers, right? All the people, and then the context of what you're doing, why you're doing it, right? And so that's where the janitors were able to say, I'm saving people's lives. They're not in the OR saving lives, but they're keeping the hallways clean to reduce sepsis. And that's very real. So anyhow, that would be my question there, or my answer there.
Absolutely. Yeah, the other thing that I thought of while you were speaking was that I believe that artists are actually provide a lot of instruction on that front, because while people are building their careers in the arts, they're often doing a million other things to keep themselves afloat. And that's definitely true depending on where you are in journalism and writing more broadly as well. And so I think that those communities or people with those talents really give a master class in finding that balance between, learning the skills or just getting the income that you need to then go and fuel your passion in your off hours.
Totally. Really well put. I know we're getting to time. So Ken or Rachel, do you want to close with a final word, or do you want to leave that to us to wrap it all up?
Can you guys hear me now? Sorry, I was trying to manage these things. Where are we on time? Got a few minutes. Let me see. I want to make sure we got everybody's questions. Yeah, I don't know if you guys talked about this, so I just wanted to ask one last question. Obviously, we probably are speaking with a pretty privileged group of folks here who either have been able to find purpose and meaning in their work, or have been able to pivot after making a lot of money, or doing things like that. And how can those of us who have this privilege and maybe have found meaning help those who, like, it's interesting you told those stories about the janitor and this, but I just can't imagine, and maybe that's just my perception, is that in a lot of the media talk, Deja, is all about how horrible all these other jobs are. Mm-hmm. So you can certainly say nice things and say hello, but I mean, how can you help lift someone up if they don't have the ability to kind of go in their only day job and find purpose with that? What are tools are out there for others who aren't as trained as you are now, to kind of help those around us find that sense of purpose, or at least be able to feel a little bit better? We're not psychologists, but to feel a little bit better and thank them. I guess maybe it's just thanking them for the work that they do.
I think that's super powerful. I just chatted out a link to a colleague's article about being a meaning giver. And I think that's super powerful, right? If it's like getting to know your mailman's name, or, thanking someone very specifically for why that FedEx delivery or that takeout meal, or, whatever, certainly healthcare meant a lot to you and really help, like, connecting the dots is massively powerful. As soon as you're any kind of a manager or employer, the options, increase exponentially. There are just so many ways to do this. And we just talked today in our fellowship cohort with folks about this notion of job crafting. We have a worksheet on it that I'm happy to share with people if folks want to email me and ask for that. But it's, it's pretty it's pretty basic language. It's not esoteric. It's not very academic. It's like, what are the tasks that you do? Who are the people that you work with? And why does it matter? You know, and if you play the why game, like a 3-year-old, well, why do you clean the hallways? Well, why do the hallways have to be clean? Well, who's coming through them? You can get a hospital janitor pretty quickly to see like, wow, I'm saving lives by keeping things clean, right? So I think any kind of manager has monstrous power in this way, and as does any consumer or customer. It can feel silly, right? And it's easy to not take the 17 seconds that it takes, or God forbid, 3 minutes to have a conversation, but it's super powerful.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great approach. I also think that, you know, one thing that's important is also reflecting back to people the purpose they see in their work already. So, you know, not assuming that people don't find purpose in their work, and, you know, and challenging our own biases and notions about what purpose looks like. So that, you know, I'm sure for the janitor who goes in every day and sees their job as saving lives by preventing infection, it's easier to believe that and feel that for them when other people are reflecting that back to them, rather than challenging the notion that they already have of their work. So I think, you know, believing people about where they are and how they see their own work is really important. And I would also say, you know, I totally agree with Nell that once you're a manager, then you have so much power to help people that work for you have the time and the space to explore what gives them purpose, whether that's through very specific programs. Like I know some places have, you know, volunteer hours that you get some sort of credit for at work, or, you know, your employee match programs, or just, you know, more flexible vacation and like scheduling policies. All of those things help people find purpose.
A lot of this kind of comes down to basic humanity and seeing each person, no matter what they do and who they are, as a person with value and purpose. And if we all could act that way as a manager, as a fellow citizen walking on the street, passing someone in a doorway, we probably all find a little bit better purpose everywhere, and that would help a lot of it. So I wanted to thank you both for sharing your thoughts and your expertise. And we will, when we send out the email with the link to this video program, we'll also share any other resources now that you have. And Dasia, if you wanted to share anything, we'd be happy to share that with others. And please do email me if you want to add something to the list. I know there's lots of resources out there that show how important purpose-driven work is and how hard it is to try to do that, you know, to juggling moms and people who work in hard neighborhoods and have multiple jobs, etc. So this is something just that affects everybody everywhere. So thank you for taking some time to share your stories and encourage us that little positivity going forward. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. If we don't see you before Thanksgiving week and other Indigenous celebrations of local communities, please have a good, safe time. Stay away from each other. Please don't spread the virus if you can help it. Please stay safe and healthy, and we'll hopefully see you at one of our December programs. And let's get through the end of this year with some brighter looks for the next year. So thank you both again.
You're here. Thank you both so much. It's great to be with you, Deja.
Yes, great to speak with you now.
Cheers.
Good night, everyone.